Welcome to Time Lapse Talks,
I'm
and
Chelsea.
I'm Noah. And today we're going to do a little bit different of an episode. We're going to be having a little less conversation, and it's going to be a little more informative. So if you like this style, let us know, and we might do some more of them.
Do you love art? Well, duh. And can you never get enough? Well, have no fear, 'cause Chelsea and Noah are here to talk about art and stuff.
The bus boycotts in Montgomery, Alabama, sparked by the arrest of Rosa Parks, lasted for 381
The
days.
citizens of Hong Kong have been protesting for democracy en masse nearly every day for 457 days.
The protests against racial injustice and police brutality stemming from the murder of George Floyd at the time of recording this video have been going on for just about a month, 29
So it's
days.
important as media coverage is starting to die down that we remember until there's real legislative change, the movement can't stop and this conversation cannot stop.
So to continue this conversation, we've decided to talk about protest art. While Noah and I don't really agree on everything, we do agree that protests themselves are an art form. I recently listened to a Radiolab podcast about Nina Simone and how she connected her art to the civil rights movement. And I know Nina Simone has a quote about how artists must be a reflection of the times. So Noah and I compiled a list of artists who have been involved in protests and who we truly think embody a reflection of their times.
Before we get into these artists who we think are truly reflecting their times, I wanted to circle back to what Chelsea was saying about protests themselves being art. So if you listen to the show, you know that I'm a big dictionary definition guy. And one of the things that we got really in depth into in our What is Art video is the definition of art. And so I'm going to pull up the definition of art and protest to you. The definition of art is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination. The definition of protest is a statement or action expressing disapproval or objection to something. So protests are just a form of art with the message being disapproval. Would you agree with that, Chelsea?
Yeah, pulling out the big words. Not really.
Bam, bam. You know how I love them dictionaries.
All right, should we get started on our list?
Yeah, I say let's go.
Awesome. So ever since the start of the protesting, these very beautiful, striking murals of George Floyd have been popping up all over the world. Like, of course, they're popping up in big cities in America, but they're also in Nairobi, Kenya, Manchester, United Kingdom, and the Idlib province in Syria. And you can find a ton of information about these murals on CNN.com. It has all the artists, and I even looked some of them up, and they're great. They all have their own Instagrams, so it's just a great resource to look at those even more.
One of those muralists who is out of DC is a woman named Tinbite Solomon, who also goes by Trap Bob. She's a visual artist, an illustrator, and an animator. She's really known for bright, bold colors and using her ladies to convey socially conscious messages. She's really inspired by activism and working in her community to combat issues, and she aims to bridge the gap between her audience and her message. So she's a really cool artist. She's DC. I went to school right outside of DC, so I have a lot of love for DC. And she's also working with this cool initiative called the Create Change campaign. It's an initiative through the Denver Smith Foundation. So Create Change is an initiative of the Denver Smith Foundation. It's designed to bring together a collective of liberated designers, artisans, craftsmen, and creative geniuses who believe in using creative expression to uplift communities who have faced injustice, and the movements support them. So if you want to check that out, you can find it at the denversmithfoundation.com/CRE, the number 8 change. For all my artists listening, it's a really cool thing if you want to get involved and support with your art. Reflect the times with your art.
So for me personally, I think for a lot of people, like especially old people, when they listen to rap, they're like, why are they so angry? And it's like, just listen to it. Listen to what they're trying to say. Because to me, rappers have taught me more about politics than high school ever did. Like high school kind of teaches you the fake shit, and rappers have sort of taught me the real shit. Do you get that?
Well, so rappers are speaking from experience. School
Yeah.
is speaking from a textbook, right? Generally, it's the voice of the people.
Exactly. And so we wanted to mention a few rappers on this because I think like of all the people who exemplify the time, I think currently in the news that is happening right now, it's rappers because a lot of people are getting involved in what they've been talking about for years and years. So, for example, Run the Jewels. Run the Jewels is, if you haven't heard of them, I'm sure most people have heard of them, but it's a rap group of LP and Killer Mike. And ever since they joined together, they have used their platform to discuss themes of dissatisfaction with police brutality and systematic racism. I think the first time I ever heard them was watching the music video for Close Your Eyes and Count to Fuck, and that came out in 2014, and it's just like a police officer depicted, and he's fighting with an unarmed black man, and supposedly somebody was like, Killer Mike, like, how could you show them as being equal? And he's like, no, it's showing that all of this violence is getting us nowhere. He said it's representing the futile and exhausting existence of a purgatory-like law enforcement system. There is no neat solution at the end because there's no neat solution in the real world. However, there is an opportunity to dialogue and change the way communities are policed in this country. So he was talking about this long before Eric Garner, long before George Floyd. And their latest album, Run the Jewels Made, is just riddled with this type of political commentary. And when I first heard it, I was like, wow, they must have made this album really fast for it to have come out so soon in light of all of these political protests. But it's like, no, they've been making this album for a while. It just so happens that they've had these thoughts and they just coincide so true to these times. My favorite song from the album, Walking in the Snow, is a metaphor for what it's like to walk through a world full of white privilege. And that's just one of the many metaphors throughout the album. So if you haven't listened to it, I suggest you go do
Yeah,
that.
Killer Mike has always been outspoken about his social activism. I mean, he came to the forefront in Atlanta and stepped up to help guide the city in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. He says that his activism roots go deep, right? Here's a quote that I like. He said, "It's not like I had a choice. My grandmother was active civically. My grandfather has strong social and political opinions, even though he was very working class and pro-union guy. So from the home early on, he was instilled with this idea that you need to be proactive and you need to be working in your community to make a difference." And I think he's really taken that to heart. It shows in all of the action that he does. He is the embodiment of a citizen artist, right? His art, as we said earlier, it reflects the times that we live in, and it encourages open thought and discussion. He uses his artistic platform to promote real change from a grassroots level, right? And not only in his music does he do this, he created a show on Netflix you can watch. It's called Trigger Warning. It's great. I think this is a good example of him using his platform because he's creating an entertainment show, and yet he's using his artistic genius to create daring social experiments that challenge Americans' ideals.
I love that show.
It's fascinating and it's really eye-opening.
It's also funny. He's like trying to teach people how to do plumbing through porn. All right, let's go to Russia. This is a little bit different than our previous entries, but I wanted to talk about a Russian contemporary performance artist by the name of Pyotr Pavlensky. He is crazy.
He
He's
is fucking crazy.
He's one of those artists that I'm like, is he crazy or is he brilliant? I don't know, but let us know in the comments. He has done extreme acts to protest unjust Russian laws. He has nailed his scrotum to the ground. He has sat naked on like a wall for everyone to see, and he cut his earlobe off. There's this very striking picture of him with blood pouring down his body from it. He has wrapped himself naked in barbed wire and placed himself outside of a security building. He has burned down doors. He is crazy, and he knows every time he does these acts of like self-harm and vandalism, he is making sure that the police will see him because he wants to get caught, and he wants to incorporate his arrest into the artwork. It just sort of adds a layer of protest. You know, he's absolutely fearless, and I love him. I also wanted to talk about, along with Pyotr Pavlensky, is the band Pussy Riot. This is what Wikipedia said. Pussy Riot is a Russian feminist protest punk rock band. That's a lot of hyphens. They are very cool. I love their songs. I cannot stop listening to their latest song, 1312, while I appreciate Run the Jewels albums because it's really intelligent and uses a lot of metaphors. This Pussy Riot song, 1312, is just like super mad, and when I listen to it I'm like, yeah, I'm mad too. So please listen to it. They are rejected a lot by Russian society members because a lot of themes in their music is like LGBTQ rights, anti-Putin sentiment, and like anti-Russian policies, and they're often arrested for their guerrilla performances. Their latest song, 1312, is like, most of the lyrics are like ACAB, fuck the cops, you know, and it's amazing. The first song that they ever wrote that came out in English was in 2015, which was actually about the murder of Eric Garner. It's called I Can't Breathe. And I just thought that was just very interesting that they, even though they're all the way in Russia, they felt so closely connected to the murder of Eric Garner that they decided to write their first song in English for him. But the reason I brought up Pussy Riot alongside Pyotr Pavlensky was because in 2012, when they were arrested, this was when he sewed his mouth shut to protest their arrest. And he was actually copying another Polish artist, David, and this is a Polish name, so bear with me, Wojnarowicz. He sewed his mouth shut to protest Reagan's response to the AIDS epidemic. And, you know,
Oh, shit.
yeah, when people are physically sewing their mouths shut to show this symbol of like, you are silencing me, it's very powerful to see that.
No, it's an incredibly powerful statement to self-mutilate in the desperation of being heard. So in 1963, Vietnam was in turmoil. The government had been pushing religious intolerance against the majority Buddhist population and was instead working for the Roman Catholic population. They ended up firing into a crowd of Buddhist monks. I mean, they were killing people when these people were just hoping for religious freedom, you know, something that all of us desire, just the freedom to believe what you believe. After this shooting of these citizens, a 66-year-old Buddhist monk, Thich Quang Duc, would perform one of the most horrific protests the world has really ever seen. He walked into the middle of a busy street with two of his fellow monks. He sat down in the lotus position to meditate as one of his fellow monks poured gasoline on top of his head, and then he struck a match. During the whole time of self-immolation, he didn't scream or move, but it just shows that he was feeling so desperate for his people that only an act so shocking and horrific that it would appeal to the humanity of people that were acting inhumane could allow him to be heard. And he literally committed his life to that. So I think it speaks to not only the power of protest, the power of the people that are enacting the protests. And not all protests have to be shocking for them to be effective. But it is important for us to realize that some people literally give their lives to protest.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. I'm trying to think of a way to transition from that smoothly, but there isn't. So, so another act of self-mutilation was, that's probably the best transition I have from
Yeah,
that.
God.
Speaking of
Yeah, I get
self-mutilation,
content warning, content warning. I guess we should put that earlier in the episode. Like, we're going to be discussing really fucked up things.
I don't believe in content warnings. I'm just kidding.
Maybe
But
we'll put that. I don't believe in content warnings. And then I'll come in and be like, yeah, but I edit the audio and I do. So content warning.
so in 1997, a Cuban artist by the name of Tanya Bruguera performed a piece called The Burden of Guilt. And during this, she did this many, many times. So it wasn't like one 45-minute performance art. It was like she did this a bunch of times. She stood naked except for a hacked open lamb carcass tied around her neck by like this thick rope. And she ate dirt and salt water for 45 minutes. And if you look at the pictures, it starts out like she's like noble, but then she just struggles and you can like see the pain on her face. The reason she did this was because Cuba had broken free from Soviet control after 32 years, but the terms of the arrangement left Cuba to get incredibly impoverished. So she did this as sort of a way to protest. She was going back to her roots, to the indigenous Cuban people who had chosen to eat dirt and die rather than be under Spanish rule. Yeah, it was just incredibly striking, that somebody would be so willing to protest that they would just eat dirt. Like literally eat dirt. It's just like incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah, it's incredible to see how willing people are to give up their humanity to try to fight for other people's humanity. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I think that we've sort of established, but we haven't outright said it, that protesting is uncomfortable and it requires endurance. And it doesn't necessarily have to be physically uncomfortable like the examples we've mentioned so far, but it could be so much as you spend a weekend doing some activism rather than chilling, and it's
Well, and it can be the discomfort of having that conversation with your grandma about how it's not
yeah.
okay to say things or to behave in certain ways. Them being old or them being from a different time, however you want to say it, is not enough. And it's our job to make sure that we are having those uncomfortable discussions with those people in our life.
Yeah, definitely.
Fellow white people.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that's a disclaimer, like me and Noah are both white.
So I wanted to share something that was a little less mutilating, but still
So I'm imagining you like tipping a fedora and going, mutilady. Do you
oh
get
my god. Mutilating. God.
mutilady?
Oh yeah. I promise I'm not a neckbeard. I shaved that specifically.
I don't.
What I was gonna say is I wanted to talk about something a little less mutilating. This is a more recent protest. It's called the Standing March, and it was the brainchild of French artist J.R., which, I didn't deep dive into him and figure out his actual name, and American filmmaker Darren Aronofsky, who is, see, I didn't have a problem pronouncing that last name. um,
He's directed one of my favorite movies, Black Swan.
yes, so he's the director of Black Swan. Fun little trivia. So they created this enormous projection project, which featured 500 people from different backgrounds cast onto the face of the National Assembly building during the 2015 National Climate Change Conference in Paris. The people would turn 180 degrees over and over to show that the world was watching. And clearly, it didn't work.
Hey, protesting doesn't always work.
And so it doesn't always work, but it was still effective enough that we're talking about it today.
Yeah.
So it made a statement. And whether it worked immediately or it will have repercussions in the future, so like you don't know who saw that protest, looked into it, and now agrees with the need to fight climate change, right?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe at least one person going into that summit was influenced. I hope at least one. I believe most people at that level are pretty heartless.
Yeah, I don't have too much hope.
You guys have all probably seen this famous picture, the flower power picture. So in the 1960s, during protests against the Vietnam War, hippies began a movement called flower power, in which they would give police very innocent items. Was it the police or was it like a militia? Because they had like, the police is a militia, so what's the difference? Well, yeah, whatever. So you guys have all probably seen the famous picture of the hippie placing flowers into the police officer's gun. This was taken by Bernie Boston. It's just kind of interesting, I think, in this picture. It's just very reflective of what's happening today with the very obvious imbalance of power, with these very peaceful protesters on one side and then this army on the other side pointing guns at them, and the hippies were wielding flowers, toys, and candy. And you know
Yep.
what? Like,
Sounds about right.
so much for peaceful protesting, because this is again a case in which this basically did nothing to stop the Vietnam War, their protesting, but it does impact me today when I'm looking back through history at it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is the people in power are going to want to stay in power, and it might not always have the immediate effect that people want, but it always has a ripple effect on the next generation.
Yeah, I think in like 50 years, people are gonna be like, wow, that was nuts.
Yeah, but maybe this can be a tipping point. And maybe if we keep the fight up, they can look back and be like, "Oh man, 50 years ago, a big change happened in America."
Yeah, exactly.
But you were talking earlier about the hippies being confronted by militarized police, and we've seen that all over this nation with peaceful protests being combated by militarized police. I mean, I live just outside of Richmond, and there have been protests going on since George Floyd's murder. And the police have continually, day after day, assaulted peaceful protesters. I feel like I see a video of police brutalizing citizens almost every single night coming out of Richmond. They're firing tear gas. I mean, they're getting spooked by their own people rolling up and firing on citizens. They're spraying people in the face that have their hands up. It's atrocious.
This doesn't make sense to me. Like, protesting is the most American thing you can do.
It literally is. I mean, this nation was founded as a disapproval of the oppressive government of Britain,
Yeah.
So it's like our nation is founded on the idea of protests. So the fact that the government now is actively suppressing First Amendment rights. I mean, they're spraying press, they're assaulting press. It's crazy. One of the things happening in Richmond that I did want to get into is that while art has been used for a lot of good in protest, it's also been used to create a lot of horrible things. One of the places that's had a lot of protest attention is Monument Avenue. If you don't know, there's a street in Richmond where they have a bunch of Confederate war heroes. But if you look at the history of Monument Avenue, it's a little weird, right? So the first monument put up was a statue of Robert E. Lee that was erected in 1890, which is 25 years after the fall of the Confederacy. This is after Reconstruction has already started to take hold, after the Black community is starting to get a foothold in America. And the fact of the matter is that these monuments were placed as a symbol of white supremacy in the South. The fact that they still stand today is a reflection of the inherent racism that lives on in America. So over the past few weeks, in the face of these brutal assaults by police, Richmonders have attempted to reclaim this part of their city. If you look at the Robert E. Lee statue now versus 1890, you will see it is engulfed with graffiti. The base is completely covered. And it's a cry from the people that they want to be heard. And personally, I think it looks a million times better. Where it was a dull, boring statue of a traitor loser, now it speaks to the collective desire of the community to make a change. And while taking down the statues is not going to fix the problems we have in America, it's a start to say that we will not use art to glorify these people who have committed atrocities.
But I did want to talk about Donald Glover, aka Childish Gambino, who came out with the song This Is America in 2018. It's completely jam-packed with metaphors and symbolism, and I love it. It won the Grammy for Best Music Video in 2019, very rightfully so. It won Best Choreography, Best Video with a Message, and Best Direction at the 2018 VMAs. The whole video and lyrics are just like so symbolic. Like every single thing in the video can be interpreted. Like for example, like I didn't even notice until I was taking notes for this and I was going through and analyzing the video. So his dancing is a literal and a figurative distraction from the violence in, like if you go through and watch the video, like while he's dancing, there's like so much violence in the background that like you don't even notice because you're watching him dance. And it's sort of like a symbol that like media decides what you see, and media will celebrate the positive aspects of Black culture, but ignore all of the racism that's happening, all of the systemic problematic things that are going on. And it's just like very interesting. For example, in the part of the video where the choir is singing and then they get shot down, it's like a it's like a very obvious reference to the Charleston church shooting. And everything stops for like a half a second and then it starts going again, which is kind of like after every single one of these awful acts of violence against Black people happens, people will watch it on the news and they'll protest and they'll feel bad, thoughts and prayers, etc. But then nothing actually happens and then everybody just goes back to dancing again. This feels different,
Which I think is it's important for us to realize that we can't just turn this off, because for a huge portion of Americans, this is how they live their life day to day.
Yeah, exactly.
So even just the protest is not enough. You have to be actively engaging with confronting white supremacy and racial injustice across this nation.
What we didn't discuss and we might save for another time is like, what is the responsibility of an artist? For a little bit, these murals are great and tearing down statues are great, but in the coming future, like how can the artist perpetuate these themes? How can they keep using their voice to say things about society? And, while people's art might not necessarily like continuously, I'm not expecting everyone to start only making protest art all the time, but it's little things that we can do that will result in change. For instance, art is overwhelmingly white and it's a lot of white women, or if they do depict Black women, it's usually Black women with traditionally like European features. We really need to do a better job of representation
Yeah, and going along with that, supporting Black artists, supporting what is the say? It's Black, Indigenous, people of color artists, all of them, making sure that as the art community, we are working to decenter whiteness. And like I said, check out Create Change, Art People. Check out, there's tons of things going on in the art community. We'll try to find links and post them below, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys learned something new today.
Yeah, if you want to keep the discussion going about how we can do better as artists or the art community can do to help further this discussion, comment below. Keep the talk up.
Comment your favorite protest artist. We will see you soon.
Go out and protest, but wear your mask.
Yes, please wear your mask.
Please wear a mask. Gosh.
Thanks for stopping by. If you still can't get enough, then come back on and join next time to hear more talk about art and stuff.